Welcome to the Modern Husbands podcast, where any combination of Dr. Bruce Ross, Christian Sherrill, and Brian Page host national experts who share winning ideas to manage money in the home as a team. I'm Brian Page, founder of Modern Husbands. Sometimes our listeners want more support that a podcast can give, individual or couple support, which I now provide. Details can be found at modernhusbands.com, or you can email me at brian@modernhusbands.com. For today's podcast, we welcome Calibrate founder and CEO Nick Ashburn. Mr. Ashburn is the former managing director and head of responsible investing at PNC and former senior director at Wharton's Business School with 15 years in human-centered financial services and product strategy. In this conversation, we discuss the significance of aligning financial goals with personal values, the challenges of lifestyle creep, practical strategies for couples to manage their finances collaboratively, and a framework for evaluating spending decisions. Enjoy the show. Hey, Nick, welcome to the Modern Husbands podcast.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
So what inspired you to start Persona Wealth, and how does your approach differ from traditional financial planning firms?
Yeah, so Persona Wealth is, just to clarify, is our parent company. We're incorporated as Persona Wealth, but really our go-to-market is a brand called Calibrate, because we really think we need to calibrate more emotionally, relationally, behaviorally before we're able to make financial decisions. Probably any decision, but especially financial decisions. And so we don't manage money. We are actually a fintech company, and we are trying to support advisors in having more emotionally and relationally attuned advice that meet their clients where they are in the context of their daily lives. And it was really born out of a frustration with the financial services industry. So I most recently was the head of responsible investing and a managing director at PNC Bank in their asset management group. And I was also at the Wharton School at researching and teaching in the area of impact investing for about 6 years before that. And I bring that up because I saw how, and I don't mean this in any context at Wharton or at PNC, but just sort of the industry writ large, a lot of emotionally unintelligent financial services and financial advice. And so it grew out of frustration from that. And after years sort of inside the system, I saw that traditional advice models were increasingly disconnected from how real people make decisions. And that also a lot of what, maybe in financial therapy, we talk about the external and internal parts of finance. So the external being that technical analysis, portfolio construction, risk analysis, cash flow, all of those things. Maybe not tomorrow, but I think that a lot of that will be increasingly automated. And that's what a lot of advisors out there are really interested in, what their training's in. And so we were also brought in from a responsible investing lens to talk to clients around their values, right? And how does their money support that, or how does it reflect that and align their money with their values from an investment perspective?
What does that mean for couples in particular who are trying to merge their financial lives?
Yeah, so that's kind of interesting, because I think that when couples merge finances and they're not just combining accounts, they're blending their identities, their histories, their hopes for the future, right? And those are sometimes, also in therapy, like a lot of therapists don't necessarily have that. If you have a couples therapist, and when you maybe do premarital counseling, that might come up to some degree, but not in any level of depth. So aligning money with purpose, with your values, means stepping back from, budgeting, or stepping back from, are we saving enough for retirement, which are important questions and things to do, but really thinking about, what do we want our life to feel like, and what are we building together? And so that's, I think, what we were really seeing as sort of this disconnect between traditional financial advice, especially when it came to couples or multi-generational families, as they were navigating different dynamics there, and thinking about, how does a financial advisor support that broader context of their lives, not just, hey, we have this financial goal, or we want to make sure that we have secure retirement. And then they're getting support in those other areas where money plays a huge role. That's really what we've been building to help fill that gap and support more of that type of work within the financial advice space.
So as you work to understand what couples are doing behaviorally and what's driving them. What's one mistake you often see couples make when trying to apply the traditional
Mm.
cookie cutter financial advice?
I guess at a high level, it's that they view things more as a blueprint instead of a conversation. So,
Mm.
there are these steps, these best practices that we need to check the boxes on. And real life isn't like that. Sure, there are best practices when it comes to personal financial management and household financial management. But I think that imagining that, oh, we have to achieve these goals or make sure that we have X, Y, and Z only really misses the broader conversation. So I think that it doesn't account for emotional safety, identity, or I think what's especially relevant for your background is kind of like that relational equity. And how does that sort of manifest day to day in big and small ways? And so traditional advice is really about like, do these things. And it's missing so much of that contextual information in between.
I'm glad that you brought up the relational equity piece, because so many of the challenges we know that couples face have to do with factors that are well beyond just like this compartmentalized financial advice that you get from a traditional financial planner, like in particular investing advice, right? I
Mhm.
mean,
Right.
that's a very different thing than the practicality that is necessary to manage money and then also the domestic labor together. And those things interweave with one another. And that's one of the primary reasons I wanted to talk to you, because you recognize that without addressing those things, you can't get to the root of what is the origination of financial behavior. Um, and I think like a lot of the couples that have a really tough time with that are the couples who are time scarce, dual career couples. So how do you help dual income, dual career couples navigate financial decisions when one partner is more financially savvy or just more interested than the other?
Yeah. I mean, this is an area, I mean, this is something that my husband and I face, which I think is kind of interesting. We are high achievers, not just high earners, but high achievers. We are, go getters. We're also parents, and there's a lot to navigate. In terms of our levels of financial literacy, they're both high. And I think what's interesting in a same sex couple for us is there aren't even traditional gender roles to good or bad fall back on. And so it's just been a constant negotiation. But in a broader context, I think it,
Nick, I have to add something before you go into
yeah.
the broader context. 2 hours ago, I just interviewed Melissa, the author of Breadwinners, and she did a deep dive into the relational aspect. And there's quite a bit that she focused on in the LGBTQ community, of how relationally there's a distinction between LGBTQ couples, gay couples, and heterosexual couples. And basically, gay couples like get it right. Like when it comes to domestic labor, she's like, all the research essentially finds that the approach is equitable, the thinking is equitable, because there are no gender norms to fall back on. And that, that's who you really want to turn to, kind of as a is like a shining star of how couples can engage in the home in a way that increases marital satisfaction. So I wanted, that was top of mind for me, and I found it not only fascinated, it also reinforced everything that I've read prior to that. So moving on to more heterosexual couples where that might not be the case in as frequently as it is in gay couples. What do you find?
Yeah. So one of the things in our work and one of the things that we're measuring is something called construal level. And that is, are you a strategic and abstract thinker more naturally, or are you a more concrete and detailed thinker?
I have never heard somebody take that approach. I interview a lot of people. I read a lot of literature. Please share that again, because this is new to me.
Yeah. So construal theory is also around psychological distance. And that's why abstract thinking or concrete thinking matters. So, something that is a goal that is further out 30 years for retirement, for example,
Yeah.
it's harder for us to wrap our heads around that cognitively, is like, what does Nick Ashburn look like 30 years from now that I want to take care of?
Sure.
Right.
Right.
Without actively thinking about it sort of that way. And what we say is closing that psychological distance compared to something here and now. We have an acute issue. I'm trying to focus on that. Right. And so goal setting and, economic decisions, financial decisions at home, those types of things matter too. Is it about, oh, camp is, my son's in summer camp right now.
Yeah.
So, when we were thinking about, oh, we want to be on the ball of doing that in February, it's still a little bit further out, like the registration deadline. So that's something that my husband and I are more strategic and abstract thinkers together.
Okay.
So we have harder times. We have to be really intentional about breaking things down into smaller pieces so that we are making them concrete today compared to thinking about
See.
it later on. Also, abstract thinkers tend to be thinking about things in the why, and concrete and detailed thinkers are thinking about the what and maybe the how.
Okay. Can you give me an example of that?
I can. So, some folks that I know, they live here in the Philadelphia region. She's originally from Long Island. So they go up to Long Island a fair amount, and they move from the city, like in Philadelphia, to the suburbs out by where we live. And they're going to go from a 1-car family to a 2-car family.
Okay.
And they were thinking, well, what is the car that we're going to get? They had a shared goal that they wanted to get a second vehicle and that it is a family vehicle. But I bring up the Long Island piece because she's thinking about, well, how comfortable is it going to be when we're stuck in traffic going to Long Island for holiday weekends or something like that? And he is thinking safety, gas mileage, those types of things.
Sure.
And so that to me is a really interesting example for how they have a shared goal. They're on the same page generally, but when it comes to actually making the decision on what car to buy, budget wise, like they were also aligned there, but the tension came up in their own conversation because they were just coming at that goal and that decision with different mindsets and different frames of reference.
Which collectively can be beneficial, right?
Absolutely. It can be complementary.
How do you work through, how do you transform what can be confrontational to being complementary? What does that process look like?
Yeah. So I think one of it is around just, first of all, the awareness, right? That like, oh, are we shared in our ultimate goal? Like in that case, buying a car and like the broad budget, right? I mean, if you're not aligned there, it probably isn't necessarily around, this thing called psychological distance or construal. It's really maybe core attitudes and beliefs about money, which I'm sure you've talked a lot about here.
Sure. Yeah.
So, but if you get there, I think it's really starting to bring in some of those details in both senses. Like I don't know why I'm bringing this up, but the Sex and the City movie, I think it was back in the day, whether Miranda maybe was going back to her husband or not. And they wrote down like the pros and cons. And so actually being able to write down like, here's what's on my mind, right? Like the requirements I have in terms of making this decision. And here's what my partner has in terms of their decision making criteria. It makes it less abstract, first of all, and also helps you see both sides of what's going on compared to it feeling maybe in the moment as a zero-sum game.
Yeah. I like that. I like that approach. And it's, as you're saying that, you do that in the business world, right? I mean, you really, break it down in team meetings on whiteboards, but in a marriage, maybe it's not a go-to strategy, but it should be.
I have found so much, so whether it's digging into financial therapy or my work at Wharton, where I actually reported to an organizational psychologist, there's so much overlap, right? When we're talking about multi-stakeholder decision making, and I don't mean to be clinical or actually more sterile, calling a family and a partnership, multi-stakeholder decision making. But when you introduce, a 2+ person dynamic, they're very similar. I think when there are maybe different stakes and risks that you're considering, with an intimate partnership compared to, at work. But I think the brain is actually functioning pretty similarly when it comes to those dynamics.
So, listeners have told us that they love the ideas we share on our podcast to manage money in the home as a team, but want more help than one episode can provide. That's why I'm excited to announce On the Same Page Consulting for corporations, couples, and individuals. Visit modernhusbands.com and click Our Services at the top of the page to learn more about how I can help you or your employees manage money in the home as a team. Again, that's modernhusbands.com. Now back to the show. A lot of couples argue about money, right? That's no secret. It's the leading cause of stress and anxiety in a marriage.
Oh, yeah.
So in your experience, what role does financial planning play in reducing that tension?
Yeah. I think that it really goes to some of that construal level where, it's a huge source of conflict is how they are coming up with their goals and understanding the why, but also coming to the plan, which is the what and the how, right? So you're mixing both of those. And for us, what we also are measuring is something called positive psychological capital. And again, that's a technical term, but what that generally encompasses are 4 component parts: self-efficacy, so the confidence that I can achieve that goal or do something; optimism, I have a positive outlook, on my financial situation, on the relationship that we're going to be able to do this; hope; and then resilience. And resilience really being like, if things don't go to plan, are we going to be okay? Are we going to be able to bounce back? And I skipped over hope because I like to highlight it specifically in this context. So one time, this was actually at Christmas Eve service a couple of years ago. Didn't know that it would be so relevant to my work day to day, but the pastor of the church said the difference between hope and optimism is that hope is optimism plus a plan. And so for us, and what we're thinking about in terms of couples and financial planning, there's this element to be like, we may both have a positive outlook, but are we hopeful? Like on the surface, they may sound very similar, but I think the hope comes in when we feel like we have agency.
Yeah.
And that's personal agency. But then as a couple, is there equity in that agency? Or is there fear or shame coming up that blocks some of that agency? And so that's when we talk about financial planning. I think positive psychological capital across those 4 dimensions can be really important. And I'm not saying it's like, please take this test every time you have a financial planning conversation, but rather like these are sort of frameworks or touchstones that one might ask themselves, or, in your monthly or quarterly couples budget meeting, if that's something you do, that you're like, all right, how are we feeling across this? Like, do we feel like we have a plan? So we're feeling more hopeful, or, like, do we have a lot of confidence that we're going to be able to achieve this goal? Or if it doesn't work, what's plan B or something like that? So that's how it sort of could manifest in those couples conversations.
Hope is optimism with a plan.
That's what I like to say. And if, for those that would see this in video, you can see this little red toy over my shoulder, and that's the Hoptimist. It's a Danish toy from, I think, the 60s that's in the MoMA in New York. And I keep it here because it reminds me of that every day.
That's brilliant. So it's not uncommon for couples who are earning more each year, whether it's because of cost of living adjustments or promotions, pay increases, bonuses, whatever it may be, to experience lifestyle creep, especially when both partners are progressing in their careers. So what advice do you have for those couples to avoid lifestyle creep?
Well, let me first sort of share that guilty of that for sure, right? As my husband and I, we were earning more. That definitely happened. And as I transitioned from a very stable, well-paying job to be an entrepreneur, we had to really take stock to be like, oh, did we get, it's not so much like, do we have savings even, but like, did we just get over our skis? Is this the lifestyle, like, our house and where we live and those types of things? Is that still feasible? Like, so just being very clear that this is not from the ivory tower, me saying this, like, dealt with this very, very recently. And I think another framework that can be really helpful in navigating lifestyle creep is rooted in, again, positive psychology and human flourishing. And it's are you familiar with the PERMA framework?
Yes.
So PERMA, positive emotions. So if you're thinking about this from, do I want to make a purchase? Are we changing, are we buying things? It's like, does this purchase bring us joy or relief? Positive emotions. E is engaging activities or engagement. So would it support passion or creativity? Would it put us, bring us joy? Would it actually put us in a state of flow? Here's an example where, lifestyle creep, my husband loves to play tennis. He hadn't played tennis in like 15 years. And I got him a tennis clinic a couple of Christmases ago I was like, I think it's not only something that he will enjoy, but it's also a good way to meet people. Adult friends are hard when you're moving to new cities and things like that. So I sort of went back to this PERMA framework to be like, okay, that's engaging activities. I think it's going to give him, bring him joy. And it brings me to the R of positive relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So, within the couple, positive relationships, but also that element of socializing and building relationships there. The M is meaning or, purpose, really. Like, so does this have meaning or purpose? And then the A is accomplishment. Does it give us a sense of progress or pride? And so that's sort of a framework that I think can be helpful in. I'm not saying it's hard and fast. It's not going to, prevent you from lifestyle creep, but if it's really checking the box of well-being and it's not
Right.
rooted in what we would consider comparing financially or kind of rooted in that your sense of self or something like that, then it's probably okay. That doesn't mean there won't be trade-offs in other areas of your personal finances, but as you start to make more and you're thinking about buying a new house or taking more vacations, sort of taking stock of the why and using that PERMA framework could be a nice way of saying, like, is it really bringing me joy, and supporting my well-being, or is it because of some other thing that's cropping up that may have been unconscious?
What I love about that framework is that it runs in direct, it can complement the traditional advice to avoid lifestyle creep of simply increasing what you're saving automatically, right? Like that's the traditional answer is like, well, if you got a 5% pay increase, just increase your savings by 5%. And that way you can't. The challenge with that, or the problem with that, is if you already have enough abundance in your life, why not spend more to enjoy your life more now? And I personally, because of my money script, my mind goes straight toward saving for the future. And my wife complements my financial behavior by making sure that we're considering living in the moment now. And that compromise of perhaps increasing what you're saving automatically a little bit and then spending a little bit more than you did the previous year. That's not a creep. That's intentionality. That is, okay, I have more financial resources to enjoy my life now, and I'm going to do it. My partner and I are going to do it. And we're going to be really intentional about how we do it. And we're going to use the PERMA framework, which is like straight up spot on how you should think about spending your discretionary income, right? Of like, how is it going to improve your overall well-being? I love that framework. That's a great strategy to use. I wasn't
Every
expecting that answer, Nick. That was really good.
well, thank you. Everything that we are doing with Calibrate is rooted in well-being. And we really think that financial wellness, financial well-being is rooted in financial health. Absolutely, right? Financial security, all of those things. But it is really around alignment across money, right? And that financial health piece, relationships, and values. And I think values, character strengths and values in that sense are very well aligned with the PERMA framework. And it's when those kind of three, in the Venn diagram overlap, like for us, that's well being and financial wellness. And so, if we go back to the beginning of the conversation around financial advice and things that are, potentially automated or that technical part, I'm not as interested personally in a Monte Carlo simulation that gives me a probability of success for saving that goal, but really understanding, like, is that goal supporting my well-being, and then how do I use it? Is using my money to accomplish that goal, is that the right use of it?
Yeah. Yeah. So, how do you incorporate behavioral finance principles when advising couples with very different money mindsets?
Yeah. So one of the things that we have developed, and by the way, we just submitted a paper, so it's under review now with the Journal of Behavioral and Experimental Finance, which sort of indicates that our multidimensional psychometric, thinking about this as like the thermometer to test or assess the different psychological components of money and our relationship to money. We just submitted it to that journal, and it is much more predictive of financial health and psychological well-being than more like demographic and financial data alone, which is how most advisors or financial firms are thinking about like segmentation and how they deliver advice and products and solutions. Um, but when it comes to your question, what we've developed is something called the help aversion index. So we can sort of understand which person within a couple is more help averse. And that in sort of like family therapy leads to pursuer and withdrawer dynamics
Mm,
where, I might be the one advocating for us to go seek help in the first place, but my partner, and I'm not saying this is true with my relationship, but hypothetically, my partner may be actually emotionally withdrawing and be less, open to help. But I'm the one driving it. And when I drag them into that financial planning session, who are they going to talk to, like the advisor going to talk to, and think through it that way? And those core attitudes and beliefs also show up in our what we consider our blind spots, right? So our strengths can become our blind spots. Like when we get overextended, one of our core strengths might be social intelligence or gratitude. And we were having a conversation yesterday with someone where humility was one of their core strengths. And that humility, as it was overextended, became a bit of a blind spot and a challenge for them in asking for a promotion, right? They were sort of
yeah.
thinking about, I don't want to come off as showy or anything like that. So it's not so much in that couple dynamic, but those types of things play out all the time. And with the money scripts or core attitudes and beliefs, it's what is motivating me for this conversation or this purchase or this goal, right? And is it an internal intrinsic motivation, or is it something that's more external? And that's probably going to be triggering that unconscious money script,
Yeah.
because and sort of understanding broadly, is the use of money or the way that I'm showing up in my relationship, is it a tool that used to serve me, but is it still serving me now? Or is it I need different tools in the toolkit? And that's where, these are so multifaceted that with Calibrate, we are assessing that in a more holistic way. And for advisors working with couples, they're able to see those dynamics without having to be the therapist or having to be the person super well trained in behavioral finance or, financial therapy specifically.
What strategies have you and your husband found to be most helpful in managing money in your relationship as a team?
Well, we should probably ask him. No, but I think it's been a struggle, right? I mean, it's a journey. And I think that's what is always really important, that we are aware. We've been married for a little over, it'll be 11 years in September. Um, and money certainly has been a number one source of conflict in our relationship, right? Just like most American adults. And that's not to say they're all, knock down, drag out fights or anything like that, or it's always explicitly about money, but it could be around career shifts,
Hmm.
right? It could be around the community that we wanted to live in when we decided to buy our house in or wherever. And that's where I think money becomes the number one stressor in most people's lives, because we don't always appreciate how money does show up in those decisions. It's like, oh, I want to send my kid to a good school. Well, is that because of their perceived future economic opportunities, and or is it, the type of house and the neighborhood that we're going to be able to afford, right? Like unpacking it from that perspective. So we have gotten a little bit better around just being able to talk about those types of dynamics. And we are, like I said, we're both more strategic and abstract thinkers. So when we are able to really lay out the numbers, and I don't mean like a budgeting app, but for us, more of like an Excel spreadsheet or something like that, and see it concretely, we can say, oh, here's our goal, here's what we want to do. And we don't have to track the dollars and cents just for us to the penny, or even like weekly, but by us making it concrete, we see over and over again that it helps us achieve our goals. Usually we kind of blow past them, and that there's some literature that backs that up too, that people who are strategic and abstract make it concrete and detailed, you're going to exceed your goals. And if you are concrete and detailed, make it more abstract. Like if I said save $100 in 30 days, that's concrete. If I said save as much money as you can over the next month, that's a little bit more abstract, and it's counterintuitive based on sort of what your natural proclivities are. You need to do the opposite of that. So if you're concrete and detailed, do it as like save as much money as you can in a month, and you will probably be more successful in achieving that goal. So when you're thinking about this as a couple and you've got both going on, again, I think making it concrete is just helpful for both. But then the conversation of the context, like the why, the motivation, that's really helpful. And that's what we're getting better at. I'm not saying we're perfect at it.
But I really appreciate that. I mean, it's a little vulnerable to share that you do have conflict around money, but I'm glad that you did, because there's this myth that if you have a healthy relationship with money, and that you and your partner have a healthy relationship, that you don't have any conflict at all. It's just not true. And what I've seen is that everybody has conflict, but what matters is how you handle it. Do you handle it in a constructive, positive, loving way, or do you fight? Right. And that's ultimately the difference. And there's multiple people have said to me, well, we're not perfect because we, have conflicts about money every once in a while. And I want our listeners to recognize that is normal. What is unhealthy is when you don't work through it appropriately and responsibly, and then it leads to relational strain. So we love to end our podcast with one simple and actionable step that our listeners can take based on today's conversation. So for you, the question is, what's one actionable step a couple could take today to feel more aligned financially and emotionally?
This might sound self-serving, but I honestly think taking the 15-minute Calibrate assessment can be a really good first start.
Where? Can you tell everyone where to find it?
Yes, it will be up on calibrateintelligence.com. And the reason why I say that is a lot of these dynamics that, it's really hard to reflect on by yourself. They're science backed, and it will give you the insights that you can actually take to your partner, take to that next money conversation, be like, oh, this is really interesting. I didn't know that you looked at it this way. I didn't even know I looked at it this way. And so we're trying to help people show like what that actually looks like for, at the individual level and then the couples level. And so I think that's an actionable step, because otherwise, I'd still come back to positive psychological capital and, construal level, those abstract or concrete dynamics, and you don't really know how to measure that on your own. But if you didn't take the assessment, I think it's really understanding what is motivating you around your goals, and is that aligned with how you view yourself as a person, or your internal values. And that could be something else. Just like, okay, reflect on those two things as you are thinking about whatever that conversation is as a couple, or if you are setting new goals, assessing your goals, like, are they the right ones vis-a-vis your well-being?
I'll be sure to share that link in the show notes. Where can folks learn more about you and your work?
I'm happy to, be available on LinkedIn. You can find us on Instagram, those types of things. But ultimately, Calibrate Intelligence is where folks can usually find us. But I love to connect with folks on LinkedIn too.
Thanks for such a great conversation today, Nick.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I'm really grateful to be able to talk about this. And I am also just a big supporter and very grateful for all the work that you do in bringing these conversations to your audience.
Don't leave just yet. Be sure to like and subscribe before you do. And a reminder to visit modernhusbands.com if you're looking for money and home management support in your life. Just click the Our Services button at the top of the page. Again, that's at modernhusbands.com. And many thanks to our co hosts, our guests, and of course, all of you for joining today.